say that obviously we all agree that the UN is not a perfect organization. And yet, if it didn't exist, it would have had to be invented. At the end of the Cold War, there was lots of hope, lots of expectation that the UN would finally be able to do what it was set up to do. That great power divisions were over. We can get the great powers to agree to do what is right, to give us reasonable mandates and the requisite resources that were needed. And as we saw, peacekeeping operations grew very quickly. I see some of the peacekeepers from Benamie and others in the room, Alvaro de Soto, Akhtar Brahimi. It grew very quickly, and Benamie, who was head of peacekeeping operations. And we moved very quickly from about 500 peacekeepers to 75,000 in 16 operations. And it was exciting, it was exhilarating, there was hope. There was hope that the UN could do things. And I think we had a good run up to about 2002, after the just leading to the Iraq War. The Iraq War brought very serious divisions within the membership. It took a long time to heal, and I'm not sure I can say it has fully healed. It brought suspicions and mistrust, which is still with us. And in some senses, it's gotten a bit worse. Not only because of that, but some other subsequent developments. But the UN also at that time realized that they shouldn't just focus on conflicts, and that economic and social issues were extremely important, and that there could be economic basis for conflict. And we were able to get the member states to agree to embrace the Millennium Development Goals, for example, tackling absolute poverty across the world, improving the lives of children and mothers. We were able to get them to take on HIV/AIDS and set up the Global Fund, which has raised billions to help the poor. We were also able to get, the UN was open to bring in others into the fold, civil society and the private sector, opening the doors to them. And I firmly believe, as you've said, that even though the UN is seen as an organization of states, the ideals and the principles it exists to protect and defend belongs to the people. The charter starts with "we the peoples," and we couldn't pretend that they didn't have a role to play in the organization. And as I keep telling my colleagues and the ambassadors, if we are here to serve the peoples are out there, not in the glass house in the building. We needed to go out, reach them, and also make it possible for them to reach us. It was also obvious that public sector alone, the governments cannot tackle all the issues we deserve. And we needed to bring in private sector and work with them in partnership and really open up and challenge them to work with us in resolving some of the issues. So we went through a period of really excitement and hope. That hope has dissipated somehow. The member states who cooperated immediately after the Cold War are now at loggerheads. They can't even agree on a painful, difficult, brutal issue like Syria. They can't agree on how to help the Syrian people. And yet we all know what is happening. And I think we need to bring back hope. We need to find a way of getting these governments to understand that they need to make a common cause. What is interesting is in the past, we had big powers who thought they had the right to lead and pull all of us along. Today, I don't see a big power that wants to lead. I don't see a big power that wants to show the way. which means that if we are going to tackle any of the big issues confronting us, we need a core group of countries who come together, make a common cause, which is rational, which is sensible, that the broader international community can support and get it done. And I hope we will move in that direction in our efforts to resolve the conflicts in the Middle East and in Africa and in Ukraine. I think I've said enough on that topic. And he keeps calling me SG. For those of you who don't know what that means, it means a scapegoat. We all need a scapegoat.
Well, I will start to the right, and you will come with smarter and easier questions. Three of you on the right. Concise.
So, my name is Delphine Zamba. I'm a student in public affairs coming from France. So, I've got a question. You are the author, Mr. the former Secretary General, you are the author of a famous report called We the People, the Role of the UN in the 21st Century, also called the Millennium Goals Development, in which you mention values shared by the nation, which are the main purposes for the millennium coming, such as freedom, equity and solidarity, tolerance, nonviolence, respect of nature, and sharing responsibility. Now, my question is, the Millennium Development Goals have been implemented on the 2015 agenda. Do the nations stick to the implementation schedule? Otherwise, which are the main impediments and international solutions that could be set up to alleviate or solve these inequalities? Thank you.
Thank you. And I know the one just behind you is going to ask the question. Go straight to the question. Go ahead, young man. There's no introduction.
Mr. Annan, thank you for coming. My name is Valentin Weber. I'm from Austria. I'm a dual degree student in international affairs at Sciences Po and the LSE. My question relates to the peace-building architecture, which was created in 2005 upon your urging. In 2015, it is celebrating 10 years of its existence. And a review panel is supposed to publish a report. What is your personal opinion or assessment of the peace-building architecture so far, of its achievements, and where do you see possible improvements? Thank you.
Thank you. Third one.
Good evening, and thank you once again on behalf of all of us for your visit this evening. My question steps aside from the UN and asks of you something else. You're sitting here today.
Closer to the mic.
You're sitting here today in the capacity as well, I suppose, as the founder and chair of the Kofi Annan Foundation, and you recently wrote, "My generation, of course, has to ask itself how we can best support the young in their ambitions, for it is the least that we can do." I'm interested to know what lies in store for the Kofi Annan Foundation in 2015, and in particular for what you've written about for young people. Thank you.
Okay.
Yes, I think the target that was set for the Millennium Development Goals have had quite a bit of impact. The Millennium Development Goals has helped lift millions out of poverty, mainly in India, China, Brazil did well. Quite a lot of the other countries have implemented parts of the Millennium Development Goals, but have not fulfilled all the goals. But we can say that today there are more girls in school, mothers are healthier, children under 5 are living, are not dying, and clean drinking water is available to many more people than we had hoped. And in terms of absolute poverty, we have reduced it by 50%. That is no mean achievement, but we have not achieved it all. And the question is why we have not been able to do it. Each country approached it. In Brazil, for example, by reducing inflation drastically, one was able to raise the level of standards for millions of people. In China, the rapid economic growth helped improve their conditions. In other poorer and smaller countries, they couldn't have that sort of broad impact, but they were able to help their people in areas of health, education, clean water, and such. And so I would say that the Millennium Development Goals have been important. For the first time ever that I can remember, we all agreed to a common framework.
So, you know, when asked, I'll say that Kofi Annan was the best UN Secretary General that has ever, and that will ever exist, because he made some reforms in and during his power. Remember, in 2007, we had a lot of people killing each other here in Kenya, and we saw Kofi Annan come all the way from where he was living, from his office to Kenya. He came to settle peace. He came to settle peace between the president, Mwai Kibaki, the late president Mwai Kibaki, and the opposition leader, Raila Odinga. And Kofi Annan saw the end of a lot of bloodshed that was everywhere. I was like 12 years back then, and I was so much afraid of the things I saw. I was young, but I could see, you know. So for this reason, I have always loved what Kofi Annan has done. So I want us to delve into this video, listen to what Kofi Annan is going to say, and listen to some of the things he has done for the world. Many of us may not appreciate what the UN has done, but they have done something. They have done something that is worth credit. So without further ado, let's jump into this video, and then I'll give you my thoughts, and we will have a critical analysis by the end of the
for development, a framework that was accepted by all governments, civil society, and understood by the ordinary person in the street in Delhi, Accra, or Johannesburg. It didn't take a thesis to explain to the mother that the daughter has to go to school, that clean water was important, or to get companies to understand that they don't have to pollute the lake that is producing drinking water for the village. So not all has been achieved, but we have gained a lot. And now, of course, the Secretary General is looking at what they call the SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals, to follow the Millennium Development Goals when they end in December this year. My own feeling is that the MDGs are the absolute flaw that we should help ensure that each citizen receives. And so even if we have not completed or achieved it by 2015, December 2015, we should continue our effort. On the question of Peace Building Commission, one of the people in this room played a very important role in that. That's Lakhdar Brahimi. The Peace Building Commission, some would argue, has not performed the way one expected it to perform. And I think there are several reasons. First of all, you have the question of resources and the question of a mandate given to the UN personnel in a certain country after the conflict. And I think we also have to be honest with ourselves. There is a tendency in the international community to believe that when the killing and the shooting stops, the crisis is over. And sometimes the money and the resources needed for nation building and peace building doesn't follow easily. And in fact, what is even worse is in desperate humanitarian situations, we come together for pledging conferences, we pledge billions, but we don't pay. We get the media, the press say government has promised this and that and that. And to read that, we promised 4 billion plus for a program in Syria, but only 19% has been paid in. What sort of solidarity or international community is that? How do we change that attitude? As Secretary General, the only situation I remember where we got more money than we needed and was the tsunami in Indonesia. And I asked my staff to analyze how come people were so generous, how come we were able to raise so much? I then came to the conclusion that first of all, the tsunami happened on the 26th of December, almost on Christmas Day. A period of the year, a period of giving, a period of generosity, a period of solidarity. And on top of that, it was really an international tragedy. The people who were hit came from about 50 different countries. A Swedish mother may be looking for a 4-year-old child, or a French woman may be looking for a daughter. And in some situations, the collection from the public exceeded what their governments gave us for the crisis. But we have not been able to replicate that since the tsunami, and we cannot organize that each crisis happens on Christmas Day for us to get that kind of response. On the Kofi Annan Foundation, where we are trying to help improve the lives of people, we do a lot on governance, on reconciliation, on mediation. I just came from Colombia and Havana, where I was trying to see what I can do to help the negotiations between the Colombian government and FARC. But I think when it comes to our relations with the young people, we do want to engage. We engage them seriously. We take you as the leaders of the 21st century. And I believe intergenerational dialogue is extremely important. My generation has not always succeeded. We've not always done what we should, and I'm not sure we are leaving you a very healthy world, particularly in terms of environment and others, but you're going to take charge. It's your world now, and we need to really engage you and try to encourage you to take responsibility. You don't have to be old to be responsible. You don't have to be old to lead. You yourself should know within you individually when you must lead, when something moves you to act, when something moves you to organize your friends, to take responsibility, to take leadership. And don't hold yourselves back. Sometimes we, the old, will tell you, shut up and listen, you are too young. I think we are doing less and less of that. But you shouldn't always be cowed by that.
So, good morning, Africans. Good morning, everyone in the world. So, today I want us to talk about the United Nations and the evolution of United Nations. First of all, right now, United Nations has become the peacemaker. It has become a place where Africans and other people who are occupants of this planet Earth can be able to go and seek justice. Yes, the United Nations also has its own court of justice, and it's located all the way in The Hague. The Hague is in the Netherlands, and this court is specifically known as the International Court of Justice. Here in Kenya, for example, we've seen many African leaders being subjected to the court of law in The Hague because the countries where they committed their crimes would not be able to handle them. And so the United Nations came on and took them all the way up to The Hague. In Liberia, if you can remember, Charles Taylor was condemned by the International Court of Justice, and he was really, he faced the punishment that he was deserving, you know. And also, if we can look at other countries, such as Russia, Putin was to be arrested in South Africa, and he was to be taken all the way to the ICJ. So in short, I'm trying to tell you that the United Nations is a place where Africans and other people, other countries in the world can be able to go and subject their problems and get some help. However, here today we have something else to speak about.
Falling under your charm has been the fate of many. Experiencing your gravity has cooled the arrogance of a few. Deep in your mind, frequent in your discourse is the central idea that the UN was originally established by the peoples and its first mission is to serve them, all of them. And you have spent like 40 years of your life in that organization. How would you evaluate today's UN and what kind of UN you are looking forward when the UN will be 80 or 90?
And I'm also part of the United Nations Club of Sciences Po, and so I was wondering, concerning the recent victory of Benjamin Netanyahu, how should we interpret it on the international level? Isn't it a reaffirmation of the position of the Israeli population regarding the international law that has not quite been entirely respected until now? So how should we interpret it on the international level? Thank you very much.
Good evening, sir, and welcome to Sciences Po. I'm Nelson Kemen, a student in public administration, born the same year as Nelson Mandela was released from prison. My dad has a question for you. We both are from Cameroon, and he wants to know how does Boko Haram get their weapons and who are their suppliers? Well, thanks.
Let me start with a question on the Arab League. This is an issue which has been on the table for quite some time. They've discussed it in the past. But now, given the situation in the region, they seem to have come to an agreement on establishing a force. I think the question is not so much whether they are able to establish the force or not, but how you use the force, what are the ground rules, and how they are deployed. When Yemen exploded, we read about the Saudi Arabians' action with a coalition, and there was a sense that nobody was going to put in ground troops. I'm not sure if by creation this force now, there is some expectation that ground forces could go in there. And if the ground forces do go in, what will be the rules of engagement? And we must also remember that as former head of UN Peacekeeping and Secretary General, and there are many people here who know the issue, we had tended often to be very careful not to allow neighbors to participate in peacekeeping operations. They often have their own history, they come with their own issues, and if you are not careful, it complicates the situation. I recall I was in Kenya in 2008 helping them resolve their conflict when the question of deploying Kenyan troops to Somalia came up. And I recall a conversation I had with several of the ministers. I said, be careful. If you're going to deploy troops to Somalia, who are your neighbors, and you also have your own Kenyan Somali population. So you have Kenyan Somalis and Somali. If the population gets pumped up against Somalis and they begin attacking them, which Somalis are you attacking? The local Somalis or the other? And you can create divisions amongst your own society. And to some extent, that has happened. And so when you have a sort of a force of that nature, the rules of engagement and deployment becomes important. Would you deploy immediate neighbors? Or would you go further afield to bring the troops? And so there are lots of questions there, and I really believe it's too early for me to comment on what would happen and what impact the forces would have. On the question of Prime Minister Netanyahu, is an interesting question you pose. Obviously, during the campaign, he indicated that he wasn't interested in two-state solution. And that clarity is perhaps helpful. He's pulled back since the election But I think he did make that statement and it's out there. And this is something that not only him, but the Israeli population would need to think through very carefully. They have two choices. Either you accept the two-state solution or insist that you're not going to have the two states and you have one state. You can have, they are also talking of a democratic Jewish state. You can have a smaller democratic state, or you can insist on a larger state that embraces Arab population that is that will constantly fight for its rights and have tensions in society. In fact, interestingly enough, one of my conversations Gaddafi, a former Libyan leader, Gaddafi had with me, he said, I have a solution for Israel. I think you guys should forget the two-state solution and have one state, call it Israel-teen, and have them all live together. And in 20, 25 years' time, we'll see who has a majority, what's his attitude. And this is really an issue the Israelis have to think about. But you also raise a question of international law. And here I think we are dealing with the question of occupation and what the international community should do. And I think this would also come to the fore if indeed the position is we do not want a two-state solution, we are not going to negotiate. That becomes a real urgent issue. On the question of Boko Haram, I think it's fascinating to see the countries in the region finally coming together to fight Boko Haram, although there are reports that South African mercenaries are also involved. The group that fought in Sierra Leone, the executive's outcome, they were much younger than dynamic, agile. I'm told now they're about 50, 60-year-old mercenaries, but apparently they are still equally effective. But in any event, the Nigerian government seems in the last 6 weeks or so to have taken the fight to Boko Haram with the support of Chad, Cameroon, and Niger. And I hope that effort will continue. And what is unfortunate is that we waited so long to take on Boko Haram and allow them room to do the damage that they have done. Thanks.
One floor up.
Okay. Good evening. Thank you for being here tonight at Sciences Po, first of all. My name is Christina Venard. I'm studying public administration at Sciences Po. I'm a French student. And my question is also related to Yemen. Sorry, I hope it's going to be different. My question is, I would like to know your opinion as regard to the UN position, the UN position in Yemen and the current situation in Yemen. And I would also want to know what is your opinion as regards to the implication from a religious perspective in the whole Middle East. Thank you.
Young man.
Good evening. I'm Alex, I'm a French student, and my question is whether you still think it is possible to have a meaningful reform of the UN Charter, and if yes, what do you think is the likeliest path to that reform, and what are the obstacles? Thank you.
Mademoiselle.
Good evening. My name is Yu Ting. I'm an exchange student from Canada studying economics. We have one of the largest freshwater supplies in the world in Canada. And I was wondering, as global demand in the population for water increases, how do you see the international dynamic changing between the haves and the have-nots of freshwater? Thank you.
I think the situation in Yemen is becoming more and more complex. Obviously, we've talked about the military action and whether ground troops would also be sent in. Attempts have been made to mediate, and I think Ben Omar has been doing quite a good job. but it's a very tough and a difficult situation. And what has been under the table is now firmly put on the table, where at the conference in Sharm el-Sheikh, the question of role of Iran and role of Saudi Arabia came up. Obviously, in Sharm el-Sheikh, they focused on the role of Iran, not so much on the other side. And this is an issue that covers the whole region from Syria to Iraq to Yemen. And it goes back to the comments I made earlier, that if we are going to try and resolve this conflict in the region, we need to have a core group of countries that make a common cause. And this should embrace the regional powers as well as the international community to try and understand that there is a common danger facing all of us, and we need to work together to deal with it. I mean, today, Syria and Iraq is one military theater. Not only is ISIS operating on both sides of the border, the coalition is doing the same, and it could spread. You talked of the role of religion. I think on this one, I have a very firm view that religion is often exploited by ambitious politicians and leaders for their own benefits. I firmly believe that the issue is not the faith, but the faithful and the way some of them behave. Every major religion can be seen as almost education in social morality. Don't kill, be fair to your neighbor, be merciful. And we are all taught these things. How can you go and kill in the name of such a religion and say that you are promoting the religion? Often it is ambitious men who are exploiting religion for power. What worries me is that these extremists are in almost every case, a small minority. They hijack a particular religion, do terrible things in the name of the religion, but the majority don't speak up. We sit back and create the impression that indeed they're acting for us, instead of reacting and getting them know that you don't speak in my name. Let me now turn to the question of the fresh water. Obviously, this is a major problem with the climate change coming up, and we have many dry lands around the world, even Brazil today, which is going through a very serious drought where water becomes a real problem. And now, of course, we are shifting, transporting bottles of water, clean water, all around the world, and throwing away these plastic bags, plastic cans, which pollute our seas and other parts. It's a real challenge how we make sure everybody gets clean water. And this is why when some people look at Norway, for example, they are very jealous. Norway today is exporting oil. In the future, probably water will be its main export. There's lots of water, and we do need clean water. We need to educate our people on how to preserve water. We need to have technology that helps us purify water, because it can become a real challenge when we talk of climate refugees. It could be on account of water, and that could also create lots of tensions. If you have a neighboring country that runs out of water and the population decides to move to go to the other country to get water, and they are stopped at the border, what are the rules? They will tell you, you are not refugees. You are not running away from war. How do we treat them? How do we handle these environmental refugees? Who takes care of them? Who provides resources for them? Because it's a problem we already see. On the same side of the border, you could have one group which have crossed the border and they are refugees and get international assistance. and you have people on the other side who are needy, but they have not crossed the border, are therefore not refugees, they are internally displaced. For a long time, they got no assistance. And they couldn't understand it. They say a hungry person is a hungry person. Why do I have to cross the border to be hungry, to be acknowledged as hungry, and be given support? It's better now. Now we have programs also for internally displaced people, but we are going to have to confront the environmental refugees, and we have no rules or guidance on how to deal with them. Yeah, I believe the Human Rights Council has made a difference, and I think the Council is working better than the Human Rights Commission did. One of the main reasons why it's working better is that each country's human rights record is reviewed. Before the Commission, the Council was set up, we had a situation in the Human Rights Commission where each year, for about 6-8 weeks, countries gathered in Geneva, and you had two groups confronting each other. One group came determined to condemn the other, and the other came determined to defend itself and also point finger at the others. We have to accept that no country in the world can claim to have a perfect human rights record. We can all improve our records, and we can all learn. When we set up the Human Rights Council, and you have 47 members on the council, and we raise the question of universal review of records of each of the countries, I pushed the idea that we should start with the review of the 47 members on the council, and that they can learn from each other. And when you know that today is my turn and tomorrow it will be yours, you are much more responsible in the comments and the criticism that you make, because it will be played back to you and your words will be used to hang you tomorrow. So the discussions become a bit more responsible. And the rapporteurs are also doing a good job traveling around the country, and some work very quietly. Others, given the nature of the issues they are looking at, sometimes become very vocal and very transparent. But I think the council is working better. I met with them. They invited me to have lunch with them about 4 weeks ago, and I was very pleased with the way the members felt that the council is working. And of course, you raise the question of what it does for women, and women's issues and their rights are part of the discussions that they have. But what is important is to encourage governments to pass the right laws at the national level. And you are right, the UN itself must show an example. And I hope when the next Secretary General takes office, she will not only make the point, she will not. That women's rights ought to be respected and acknowledged, but that is not issue for women alone, that the men have to work with the women to make it happen.
You know what? Since the establishment of the United Nations, we've had secretary generals who have been part of policy making in the United Nations as a whole. Remember, United Nations is just a product of the League of Nations that was formed to bring an end to the First World War. You know, as humans, we calculated that the First World War was only going to be the only war that would ever happen at such a scale. And so the League of Nations was established to prevent a reoccurrence of such a war at a large scale. However, that by the 1st of 1939 and to 1945 is when we had the Second World War, and by the end of the Second World War is when we had the United Nations formed. I'm not exact with these dates. I'm subject to correction, but what I know is that the League of Nations came first, is when the United Nations came second. And because the United Nations is not a thing only for Europe, the United Nations is a thing for the whole world. the whole world is subject to this. However, we also have some other countries, African and non-African, who are not members of the United Nations. We have them. North Korea, for example, is not a member of the United Nations. They ain't. In these United Nations, we have different positions, and the position which is of interest today is the position of the United Nations Secretary Generals. So far, we've had 9 Secretary Generals. These Secretary Generals are helping in the policy making in the United Nations. And among these 9 Secretary Generals that we've had so far includes Kofi Annan. Kofi Annan is an African, yeah. He is not an African American or whatever. He is purely an African, and he was nominated, and then he became elected for the position of the UN Secretary General. And so, here's what we need to know about Kofi Annan, because he was able to address very, very important issues that who would have addressed them? We would have just sat here thinking that the UN did this and that. You know, there's so much which happens and we don't know. We rely on the revelations of people who are in certain positions to come up front and talk about them. Otherwise, we can't know everything from the position we are sitting at. And so, I want us to have a glimpse of the life of the man, the legend, Kofi Annan. So, Kofi Annan was born on April 8, 1938 in Kumasi, Gold Coast. Now it's called Ghana. He emerged as a pivotal figure in international diplomacy and peacemaking. His tenure as the 7th Secretary General of the UN from January 1997 to December 2006 marked a significant milestone as he became the first black person to hold this esteemed position. So Kofi Annan's journey to the helm of the UN was characterized by remarkable dedication to diplomacy, peacemaking, and humanitarianism. After completing his education in Ghana and the United States, including studies at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, commonly known as the MIT, Kofi Annan began his career at the United Nations in 1962. His early roles included assignments in various capacities, notably with the World Health Organization and Economic Commission for Africa, and the UN High Commissioner for Refugees, the UNHCR. Throughout his career, Kofi Annan demonstrated a keen ability to navigate complex diplomatic landscape. His tenure as UN General was marked by numerous challenges, including ethnic conflicts, humanitarian crises, and threats to international peace and security. One of his most significant contributions was his efforts to reform and strengthen the United Nations, particularly in addressing racial tension and the issue of veto power with the UN Secretary Council. So, as the first black Secretary General, emphasis on black here, Kofi Annan served as a symbol of progress and inclusivity within the UN. His presence helped to inspire greater diversity and representation within the organization. He was signaling a shift towards a more inclusive and equitable global governance structure. Moreover, Kofi Annan sought to address the inherent limitation of the Security Council, particularly regarding the veto power wielded by 5 permanent members. We have the veto power, which whatever they say, they overrule all the decisions of the other world countries. They overrule, and these veto powers include China. We have France, we have Russia, we have the United Kingdom, and then we have the mighty USA. Now, while the veto power is intended to safeguard the interest of these nations, it has often been criticized for impeding decisive actions in addressing global crises. Now, during his tenure, Kofi Annan advocated for reforms aimed at democratizing the decision-making processes within the UN, including proposals to expand the Security Council and limit the use of veto in certain circumstances. While these efforts faced resistance from those quarters, They contributed to a broader conversation about the need for a greater accountability and transparency within the organization. Kofi Annan's leadership extended beyond institutional reform to include proactive efforts to prevent and resolve conflicts around the world. He played a central role in mediating peace agreements in various regions, including Bosnia, Kosovo, and Eastern Timor. His diplomatic efforts helped to alleviate tensions and promote dialogue among conflicting parties, thereby contributing to a greater stability and security on the global stage. In the contemporary world, Kofi Annan's legacy continues to resonate as a beacon of hope for multilateralism, diplomacy, and collective action. His emphasis on the principles of human rights, peacemaking, and sustainable development remains relevant in addressing the complex challenges facing the international community today. While much work remains to be done in advancing the goals of peace, justice, and equality, Kofi Annan's life and legacy will always serve as a reminder of the transformative power of leadership and the enduring importance of international cooperation in building a more peaceful and prosperous world. Now, we've seen that Kofi Annan, the presence of Kofi Annan in the UN has shifted the dynamics. The dynamic was once the high places such as the UN Secretary General was left for veto powers or countries in the West. But once we find that an individual who is an African, who is black, had the position of the UN Secretary General, it gives Africans hope. It gives black people hope. It also gives other people hope that there is hope in everything. There is equality, there is justice, in as much as it might not be to the extent that we want it, but it has been shown. We also find that Kofi Annan tried to limit the powers of the veto in certain circumstances. It was not only that might makes right. No. Actually, majority is what should count. And the majority are not the veto. The veto are just 5 countries. France, China, Russia, and USA. Those 5 countries. And so, I thought it was also important for us to discuss who are these secretary generals who have existed, and is there a chance that maybe in the future we can have another Kofi Annan? Is there a chance that we will have another black person in the position of the UN Secretary General, or was it just a one-time thing? Is there a chance for America to have another Obama? That's a question that is important and we need to ask, Now, the United Nations General Assembly stands as one of the most significant deliberative bodies in the world, providing a platform for all member states to convene, discuss, and address global challenges. It was established in 1945 alongside the founding of the United Nations itself. The UN General Assembly embodies the principles of multilateralism, cooperation, and collective decision-making. I don't know why I'm having problem with this multilateralism. Yes. The importance of the UN General Assembly lies in its universality and inclusivity. Unlike the Security Council, where only 5 permanent members hold veto power, the General Assembly provides each of the 193 member states with an equal voice and vote, regardless of their size, population, or economic power. This egalitarian structure reflects the fundamental principles of the sovereign equality enshrined in the UN Charter. The General Assembly functions encompass a wide range of responsibilities, including, number 1, deliberating on matters of international peace and security. The second one is approving the UN budget and overseeing financial matters. The third one is electing non-permanent members of the Security Council and other UN organs. Number 4 is adopting resolutions and declarations on various global issues, including human rights, development, and environmental protection. The fifth one will be this: providing a forum for member states to engage in diplomacy, negotiation, and consensus building. Throughout history, the General Assembly has played a crucial role in shaping the international agenda and advancing key priorities, from decolonizing and the promotion of human rights to sustainable development and climate change. The General Assembly serves as a forum for dialogue, cooperation, and action on pressing global issues. In tandem with the General Assembly, the Secretary General of the United Nations serves as an organization chief administrator or officer and de facto leader. Since the establishment of the UN has been led by a succession of Secretary Generals, each bringing their own leadership styles. And here's where we find Kofi Annan, remember? Each bring their leadership style, each bring their vision, each bring their priorities to the role, you know? Now, here is a brief overview of the UN Secretary Generals who have served since the establishment of the UN in 1945 up to now, by the time of the creation of this video in 2024. Now, the first one we have Taigev Lai. Taigev Lai was born in 1940. He worked in the UN in 1946 up to 1952. We can say he worked for 7 years. So he is the first Secretary General. Lai oversaw the early years of organization, including the establishment of the key UN agencies and the adoption of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. The second Secretary General is Dag Hammarskjöld. Dag Hammarskjöld served the UN as the Secretary General in 1953 to 1961. He consumed close to 9 years, you know. So Hammarskjöld is remembered for his efforts to mediate conflicts, promote decolonization, and strengthen UN peacekeeping operation. He tragically died in a plane crash while on a peace mission in Africa. Now, the third one we have U Thant. U Thant worked in the UN between 1961 to 1971. This one is close to 10 or 11 years. The first Asian Secretary General, U Thant, played a crucial role in diffusing the Cuban Missile Crisis and advocating for peace during the Vietnam War era. The fourth one we have Kurt Waldheim. Kurt Waldheim. Waldheim tenure was marked by challenges, including the Arab-Israeli conflict, the Iranian Revolution, and the rise of international terrorism. The fifth one we have Javier Perez Duquela. Javier Perez Duquela focused on conflict resolution, including negotiation to end the Iraq War and the conflict in Cambodia. You see? And then we have the sixth one, we have Boutros Ghali. Boutros Ghali, not Charlie. Boutros Ghali faced criticism for his handling of conflict in Rwanda, Bosnia, and Somalia, but he also worked to strengthen the UN peacekeeping and humanitarian efforts. Boutros Ghali worked between 1992 and 1996, and here we can see he is facing criticism for holding the crisis in Rwanda, where we had the genocide, which was somewhere in 1994. Issue is in Bosnia and Somalia. The seventh one comes our guy, Kofi Annan. Kofi Annan worked for the UN between 1977 and 2006. So, as discussed earlier, Kofi Annan was marked by efforts. Kofi Annan's efforts was marked by his reform to the UN. He promoted peace and security, and his address on the global challenges such as HIV/AIDS and poverty. Back then, these HIV/AIDS and poverty, particularly HIV/AIDS, was such a great deal. It's not like today. Now, the eighth one, we have Ban Ki-moon. Ban Ki-moon served for the UN between 2007 to 2016. Ban Ki-moon focused on sustainable development, climate change, and gender equality during his tenure, advocating for the adoption of the Sustainable Development Goals and the Paris Agreement on climate change. Now, the ninth one, we have Antonio Guterres. Antonio Guterres has worked for the UN between 2017 up to date. He's still working for the UN. Guterres has prioritized conflict prevention, peace building, and UN reforms, with a particular emphasis on addressing the humanitarian and socioeconomic impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, here's what we need to understand. Each Secretary General has faced unique challenges and opportunities during their tenure, but all have been united in their commitment to advancing the purposes and principles of the UN. Through their leadership, they have helped to shape the course of international affairs and uphold the values of peace, justice, and cooperation enshrined in the UN Charter. We might say that the UN is unjust, we might say the UN is this and that, but the UN has really worked hard considering where it has come from. The UN is always working up and down to make sure that we don't have another third world war. The UN has been a source of employment to so many people. In as much as it has its negative side, it also has its strength. Look at where it has come from. Look at where it is today. Sometimes we need to appreciate the things that we have. Let's not focus on the glory. Let's focus on the story. When we know the story, we appreciate what we have, be it glory or not glory, whichever thing. This is Evans from Kenya. If you enjoy watching my videos, kindly do give me a super thanks, subscribe to the channel, become a member of the channel, and share the video to help spread awareness. Thank you, and see you in the next video. Stay African. We love you guys.